Welcome to Nero Wolfe's world, where orchids bloom and secrets unfold. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Archie will keep score, Wolfe won't admit he cares. Subscribe for more classic Nero Wolfe mysteries. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the death of an old companion. If you want to know how fast serenity can die, try serving poached eggs to Nero Wolfe just before the phone rings. 1 second the air smells of butter and smug contentment. The next it's sliced by a bell that could have been tuned by Torquemada. Fritz had barely set the silver tray down when the first ring hit. He froze, horrified at the breach in breakfast etiquette. I gave him a mercy nod and crossed to the instrument. "Brownstone of the great man," I said. "Archie Goodwin, interpreter of miracles." A woman's voice came through, low, careful, the kind trained in marble halls and charity luncheons. "Mr. Wolfe's office. This is Lydia Kent. I need to speak with him. It concerns the death of Dr. Arthur Kelling." That name didn't ring any bells on our invoice shelf. "Condolences," I said. "We sell justice, not embalming. Mind telling me how that ties to us?" "I believe," she said, steady but trembling underneath, "Mr. Wolfe was his oldest friend. Dr. Kelling named him as executor of a sealed letter to be opened only if he died by unnatural means. He's dead, Mr. Goodwin. The police say suicide." I looked over at Wolfe. He was buttering toast with the same precision generals use on maps. The second the name reached him, his hand stopped mid-stroke. A crumb dropped, an event of seismic proportion in our household. His head lifted slowly, eyes hooded. "Madam," I said into the mouthpiece, "hold a moment." I covered the receiver. "A woman named Lydia Kent says a Dr. Arthur Kelling checked out early and left you holding the last envelope." Wolfe's brow deepened, that rare expression meaning memory had kicked a locked door. "Kelling," he murmured. "Arthur Kelling." Then louder, "Put her through," I relayed. "You have him, Miss Kent." Her tone softened to gratitude. "Mr. Wolfe, I wouldn't intrude if it weren't urgent. The police are closing the matter, but I know he didn't take his life. You were listed. He trusted you." Silence stretched. Wolfe's fingers tapped once on the armrest. That's the sound he makes when his heart muscles are voting against his intellect. "Where are you calling from?" "My apartment, Riverside Drive." "You wish me to read this letter?" "Yes, it's with me. The authorities release personal effects." "Indeed. Come here at 11:15. Her breath caught. "Thank you." He replaced the receiver with the delicacy of laying a rose on a grave. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. Fritz, not knowing whether to serve or pray, hovered like a saint with stage fright. I sat, poured myself coffee, and waited. Finally I said, "The great man doesn't collect friends, only clients. If this one slipped through, I'm betting there's a bill somewhere unpaid." Wolfe opened one eye. "Archie, decency precedes commerce." "Sure, but commerce keeps the decency fed." "Phooey." He stabbed the air with his toast. "Arthur Kelling was an intellect of substance. We studied under the same tutor in Montana, long before you were born." That was a novelty. Wolfe referring to an era without orchids or invoices. "You mean you once lived outside New York and survived?" His lips twitched, which for him is a belly laugh. "He was an obstinate man, capable, moral, and, alas, naive. If he is dead, the world is thinner. According to Miss Kent, the world's not sure he did it himself." "That," Wolfe said, "is precisely why I must see her." He reached for his beer glass, empty. He glanced at the clock. 9:42 a.m. "Confound it." "Noon rule," I reminded. "You wrote it." He grunted. "One day I shall revise my constitution." "You and Congress both." He resumed breakfast. Fritz, sensing reprieve, collected the plates. "You will receive her," Wolfe said between mouthfuls, "and ensure she is truthful. I shall come down after orchid attendance. Suppose she's lying through perfect teeth. Then I shall decide whether to throttle my sentimentality or her." At 11:15 sharp, the doorbell sang its second movement of the day. Fritz opened. his privilege for visitors without subpoenas, and Lydia Kent stepped into our routine like a well-dressed earthquake. She was mid-30s, porcelain skin against a black hat veil, posture that could hold a board meeting or a breakdown. She clutched a small leather case as if it were proof of innocence. "Mrs. Kent," I said, offering my most trustworthy grin, "you've reached the sanctum. Step lively before he decides orchids outrank humanity again." Her eyes, grey, sharp, swept the room. "You're Mr. Goodwin." "The one and only. Coffee?" "No, thank you." Wise. It's democratic but brutal. She smiled faintly, score 1 for charm offensive. I led her into the office. Wolfe was at his desk, mountainous and still, fingers steepled. The sunlight slanted through blinds, striping his face like parchment. "Mrs. Kent," he said, "sit." She obeyed, perching on the edge. "Dr. Kelling's death. Spare the preamble. Tell me of the letter." She opened the case, withdrew a sealed envelope embossed with a medical insignia. "He left this with me, instructing that it be given to you if anything happened not natural. I'm frightened, Mr. Wolfe. The police found the gas tap open, but there were things, details, that don't fit." "Such as?" "His fountain pen. He never went anywhere without it. A vintage Waterman, gold filigree, one of a kind. It's missing." Wolfe's lids flickered. "A triviality, perhaps." She shook her head. "Not to him. It was his signature, literally and professionally." I took the envelope, examined the seal. "You want us to find out who misplaced his pen, or who misplaced his pulse?" Her fingers tightened on the purse. "He feared someone. I don't know who." "Did he name me to you personally?" "Yes. He said if anything happened, I was to trust only you." That earned Wolfe's full attention. He reached for the bell cord and gave it a pull. Fritz appeared instantly, as if wired to destiny. "Coffee for our guest," Wolfe said. "Water for Mr. Goodwin. My beer waits for noon." "Yes, sir," Fritz said and vanished. Wolfe regarded her. "Your association with Dr. Kelling?" "I was his research assistant years ago before I married. My husband died in the war. Arthur remained a friend. Lately he'd grown, haunted. He spoke of debts unpaid, things buried." "Material debts?" "I don't know." He studied her another full minute. You could almost hear the gears in his skull oiling themselves. "Mrs. Kent, I will read this letter privately. You will remain available." "Of course." Fritz re-entered with a tray. Coffee for our guest and water for me. Wolfe ignored his own glass until the clock's hands inched together. He checked the dial, satisfied, and let the moment pass, unremarked. "Archie will take your particulars. Good day." She blinked. "That's all?" "For the moment." When she'd gone, leaving perfume and unease behind, I said, "Friendly fellow, your old companion. He sure knew how to liven up a Thursday." Wolfe ignored the sarcasm, slit the envelope with his penknife, and unfolded a single sheet. His eyes moved, slowed, stopped. He inhaled sharply through his nose, a sound rarer than a meteor over Broadway. "Well?" I asked. He didn't answer. He read again, then folded it carefully, placed it in the top drawer and locked it. "Archie, note this time, 11:57. I am retained." "By the dead?" "By decency," he said quietly. I leaned back. "That's going to look funny on the ledger." He turned to me, eyes deeper than usual. "Arthur Kelling was many things. A fool at last." "You think it was murder?" "I think," he said, "that the phrase 'what we buried in 29 refuses to stay buried' is inconveniently vivid." "That's in the letter?" "Verbatim." I whistled. "So, we're digging up something old enough to vote." He ignored that. "You will visit Mrs. Kent tomorrow, observe her quarters, her acquaintances, and whether her grief performs or breathes. Translation, see if she's real." He nodded. "And Archie, exercise tact." "Always do." "Your definition of tact involves mirth, provocation, and ginger ale. Add good looks and it's a full resume." He allowed a sigh, almost affectionate. "You exasperate me." "That's my job security." He gestured toward the orchid's schedule on his desk blotter. "It is noon. We are encroached upon by obligations both botanical and moral. Lunch at 1. Should I invite the late Dr. Kelling? His look could have chilled soup. Enough. I rose, grinning. Okay, I'll start a file labelled The Dead Friends Fan Club. You want me to call Kramer, see if the department's treating it closed? Not yet. When the police err, we must allow them to err visibly. Public service. Precisely. He drained the beer. And Archie. Yeah? He hesitated, then, do not jest with Mrs. Kent beyond what is useful. That was Wolfe for be careful. It landed warmer than it sounded. I'll mind my manners. He nodded once, heavy with unspoken trust. Then, as ritual demanded, he pressed the bell for Fritz. The elevator. I go to the orchids. As the elevator door slid shut on him, the office filled with the hush he leaves behind, the kind that smells faintly of logic and loss. I sat, typing a preliminary memo. Subject: Kelling, Arthur. Possible suicide, probable nonsense. Missing pen, missing truth. When I finished, I leaned back and looked at the locked drawer. Whatever was in that letter had rattled the unrattleable. And when something rattles Nero Wolfe, you can bet Manhattan's about to shake in sympathy. By the time I reached Riverside Drive, the Hudson was doing its best impression of a bad conscience. Grey, restless, and trying to look innocent. Dr. Kelling's address on Riverside Drive sat between a pair of solemn stone buildings that probably hadn't smiled since Roosevelt's first term. I parked the Heron, flipped my collar up against the wind, and gave the doorman my best official but not police look. He hesitated until I said, Mr. Nero Wolfe's representative, which worked like a badge in better neighbourhoods and a joke everywhere else. Upstairs, the corridor smelled of disinfectant and gossip. The apartment door was open, and so was Inspector Kramer's temper, though he was keeping the lid on this time. He stood inside, thick-shouldered, cigar parked like punctuation between words he hadn't said yet. Well, Goodwin. His voice had the sandpaper texture of a long morning. Your boss sending you to critique my suicide cases now? Depends, I said, stepping in. Is it a suicide? That's what it looks like. Gas stove open, door locked, note on the desk. He jerked his head toward the sitting room. If Wolfe's poking at corpses again, he'd better find something worth it. Relax, Inspector. I only poke with gloves on. The air inside was a blend of gas, cheap cologne, and the faint metallic tang of something that didn't belong, maybe guilt. The windows were shut, but sunlight sneaked through thin curtains, making the dust look guilty too. On the carpet near the divan, a man lay with one arm draped theatrically toward the stove. Dr. Arthur Kelling, late of the living. His hair had gone the kind of silver that still thought it could pass for dignity. Lydia Kent stood near the mantel, pale and tight, holding her purse like a life-preserver. She gave me a small nod, polite, distant. A uniformed patrolman hovered near the door, bored enough to memorize wallpaper patterns. Kramer puffed once. You got 5 minutes, Goodwin, and don't move anything. The ME's on his way. Wouldn't dream of disturbing your artwork. I started a slow circuit of the room. The furnishings were masculine without being bachelor. Dark walnut desk, medical books, a single orchid in a glass vase gone slightly limp. Somebody had tried to open a window and changed his mind halfway. There were smudges around the latch, and one spot gleamed suspiciously clean. I leaned in. Even through my handkerchief I could smell polish. Either the maid had nerves of gold or someone had wiped a fingerprint. Neat housekeeper, I said. Kramer grunted. What of it? Too neat. A suicide worrying about smudge marks? Maybe he planned to impress St. Peter. He ignored that, moving toward the desk where a typed note sat under a paperweight. I glanced over his shoulder. I can't bear the weight any longer. To those I've wronged, forgive me. No signature, but the typeface matched an old Underwood that crouched on the corner like a suspect playing dead. I checked the ribbon, half dry, last strike faint. Typed, not written. Convenient for the literary corpse who owns a typewriter. Kramer scowled. You implying somebody else wrote it? I'm implying I've seen ghosts with better timing. When was he found? 2 hours ago. Mrs. Kent here called it in. I turned to Lydia. Mind walking me through the discovery? She swallowed, eyes darting toward the body, then back. He didn't answer the phone this morning. I came over. The super let me in. I found him like that. You touch anything? Only the window, trying to... She stopped, catching herself. It was closed. Locked? I think so. Yes. Kramer made a note, his pencil chewing itself. She's told me all this. You can save the repetition for your report to Wolfe. Sure, but Wolfe likes footnotes. I crouched beside the desk. The gas heater knob was turned halfway, not fully open. Odd. Enough to do the job, but cautious, as if death had been negotiated, not embraced. My eye caught a glint under the table, a small brass pen clip, broken, ornate with filigree. I didn't pick it up. Kramer's men would have kittens, but I pointed. That belonged to him. Kramer bent, squinted, and signalled the patrolman to bag it. Probably. Probably, I echoed. Mrs. Kent, you ever see him without a pen? She hesitated too long. No, he always carried one. Antique, gold filigree. That the missing one? She nodded, voice thin. Yes. Kramer's head swung toward her. Missing? You didn't say that. I forgot. Huh. He jotted again. Convenient forgetfulness. Her eyes flashed. Inspector, I'm still in shock. He grunted. I could tell he didn't buy it, but wasn't ready to cash the check. I kept scanning. The fireplace held the day's ashes, still faintly warm. Something white peeked from the grey. I fished it out carefully with the tip of my pen. Half a burned envelope, corner intact. Words still visible. Kent. Private. I handed it to Kramer. Maybe the good doctor wasn't done corresponding. He frowned. You find it, you keep fingerprints off. Goodwin, you're too helpful. I aimed to please. He slipped it into an evidence bag and turned to the M.E., who had just arrived, a tall, silent man with tired eyes. As they murmured shop talk, I drifted to the wall where photographs lined a shelf. Kelling in a white coat beside a younger Wolfe, both standing stiffly beside some wartime lab apparatus. Wolfe, thinner then, but unmistakable. Same eyes, same disapproval of anything unsymmetrical. Another photo showed Kelling with 3 men, a handsome one with slick hair, another thin as a ruler, and a woman half in shadow. Lydia turned away when she saw me looking. You knew those gentlemen? I asked her. One of them, Philip Harriman. We all worked together years ago. In medicine? In research. Still friends? Not recently. Her purse strap twisted in her hands like she was wringing a neck. Kramer interrupted. All right, Goodwin, your sightseeing's over. Just getting the atmosphere, Inspector. You never know when inspiration will strike. Save it for Wolfe. He rubbed his forehead, leaving a faint smear of ash. What's he want here anyway? If it's suicide, it's ours. Maybe he wants to confirm your diagnosis. That earned me a scowl. Tell him to stay in his chair and out of my morgue. Always does, Inspector. You could set your watch by his immobility. The M.E. called him over, and they huddled. I took the opportunity to slip into the kitchenette. It smelled of coffee gone bitter. Cups on the counter, one washed, one not. The unwashed one had lipstick, faint coral shade. I filed that away. When I came back, Lydia was staring at the body again, white-knuckled. I touched her arm lightly. You should sit down. She shook her head. He wasn't like this. He was proud. He wouldn't kill himself? Yes. Maybe someone helped. Her eyes darted up. You think so too? I think gas taps don't close themselves halfway. You noticed that? She blinked. No, I didn't. Kramer's growl floated over. Goodwin! Coming! I joined him by the door. You done? For now. Then scram. And tell Wolfe if he's planning another circus, I'll need tickets. Front row, he snorted. Balcony, safer. I tipped my hat to Lydia. Don't leave town, Mrs. Kent. Standard cliché, but it applies. She gave a small, bitter smile. I've nowhere to go. That was one line I believed. By noon I was back in the Heron, window cracked for air that still couldn't beat the stink of gas from my clothes. I called the brownstone from a payphone near a deli that believed in onions more than sanitation. Fritz answered, decorous as always. Mr. Wolfe is with his orchids. Tell him Archie, with death on his shoes, needs 2 minutes. A pause, then Wolfe's voice, distant, echoing slightly. Report. Dr. Kelling's flat smells like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. Kramer's calling it suicide by gas. Too neat, window wiped, latch polished, gas tap half closed. Lydia Kent present, nervous, consistent. Found a half-burned envelope marked Kent, private. Also, his pen's missing. A long breath through the line. Phooey, you are prowling amid ashes. That's what's left, boss. Ashes and a bad alibi. Did Kramer see you meddle? Only charmingly. He's unconvinced but not hostile. That will change when I prove him wrong. His tone had that soft edge that meant his brain was chewing something large. Archie, the photograph? I blinked. You already knew there was one. I surmised. Describe it. Wartime photo. Him and you in a lab. Another of him with 3 others, one identified as Philip Harriman. Lydia confirmed. Indeed. A faint pause. She did not mention the others. Nope. Played dumb or scared. Likely both. Another silence. The envelope. Retain description only. Do not attempt possession. You know me. I'd never swipe government property. You have before. Borrowed, temporarily. Return to the brownstone. We must consider this pattern. Pattern meaning murder. Meaning deliberate illusion. His voice dropped. Come promptly. The line clicked. I stared at the receiver a second before hanging up. Wolfe's promptly usually meant before lunch. That gave me exactly 20 minutes, counting traffic and Fritz's sacred 1 o'clock bell. I lit a cigarette, blew smoke at the sidewalk, and muttered, if this was suicide, I'll start believing in benevolent landlords. When I got back, Wolfe was at his desk, a small mountain in repose, eyes half closed. The office smelled of roast something, Fritz rehearsing for the 1 o'clock curtain. I tossed my hat onto the stand and gave him the rundown in person, details and all. He listened without interruption, except to drum fingers when I mentioned the polished latch. Interesting, he said finally. To clean a surface one does not expect to be examined implies forethought. Or a germ freak. Dr. Kelling was not of that persuasion. He gloried in bacteria. Lovely habit. He ignored me. The half-burned envelope, what was its paper quality? Thick, expensive, stationery, not mailer. Then someone wanted the name destroyed, not the contents. Curious inversion. Maybe he wrote something he shouldn't. Or someone else did. Wolfe's gaze lifted to me. You saw the photograph of us? Yes. That was 1919, Washington State. He saved my life. I whistled softly. Then I hope you're planning to return the favor posthumously. He exhaled. Perhaps, though sentiment clouds deduction. I endeavor otherwise. Sure, you fail beautifully. He almost smiled, then rang for Fritz. Lunch. Fritz appeared with plates that could resurrect hope itself. Veal in cream sauce, buttered noodles, green beans lined like soldiers. Wolfe gestured toward the dining room. Come, Archie, let us honor the dead by not poisoning ourselves. As we sat, he poured beer into chilled glasses, the foam settling like conscience. You will type a memorandum after lunch, he said. Title, Kelling, Suicide Hypothesis Unacceptable. Catchy. And call Saul Panzer. We shall require his discretion. For tailing Lydia? For observing whoever now watches her. That made me stop mid-bite. You think she's bait? I think, Wolfe said, that whoever cleaned that latch expects no one to notice. We shall oblige them with disappointment. I raised my glass. To disappointment, then, he clinked gently, and to the truth, which refuses to stay buried. If there's one sound that doesn't belong in Wolfe's office, it's rain. You can't hear much of the city through those thick brownstone walls, but that afternoon the downpour had rhythm, slow, deliberate, like it knew it was drumming on the lid of a coffin. I was typing up my notes on the Kelling apartment when the doorbell rang at precisely 3:45. Fritz padded in, announced Mrs. Kent, and stepped aside like a man presenting doom in a tasteful wrapper. She came in looking every inch the grieving lady who'd practiced in the mirror, hat with veil, gloves folded just so, eyes red but determined to be useful. In her hand was the small leather case again, the one she'd carried this morning. She set it on Wolfe's desk as if it might explode. I'm sorry to come unannounced, she began. Wolfe didn't lift his head from the book he was closing, a thick German volume that probably smelled worse than the orchids upstairs. Madam, apology is wasted when necessity justifies intrusion. Sit. She did, perching like a nervous sparrow. Dr. Kelling's attorney delivered this to me this morning. It's a certified duplicate and covering memorandum attesting to the letter you already hold. I took the document folio from her gloved fingers. There was no seal this time, just the attorney's ribbon and stamp. Wolfe examined the certification, frowned, then slid the transcript free. The paper inside rustled like a clerk's conscience coming due. He read silently, lips tightening. I waited. When Wolfe reads something he doesn't like, his eyebrows form a committee and hold a protest meeting. After a full minute, he stacked the certified pages and laid them flat on the blotter. "Well?" I prompted. He ignored me. "Mrs. Kent, were you acquainted with the phrase Harriman's promise?" She blinked. "Yes, it was a project, years ago." "Define it." "It was a pharmaceutical compound developed by Dr. Kelling and financed by Philip Harriman. There were problems with the trials, safety, legality. It was shelved." "Shelved," Wolfe repeated. "A euphemism for buried." Her hands clenched on her purse. "It was a mistake. We were young, ambitious. Arthur blamed himself more than anyone." I leaned back. "If skeletons are rattling, Doc Kelling seems to have paid for the opening act." Wolfe shot me a look. "Restrain your levity." Then to her, "Who comprised the we?" "Myself, Arthur, Harriman, and George Lannard. We formed a partnership under a research charter in 1929. When the scandal broke, we disbanded." "And since then?" "Occasional letters. A reunion dinner 3 months ago arranged by Harriman. Arthur thought perhaps we could make peace." "Instead," Wolfe murmured, "he found extinction." She shivered. The rain outside deepened like applause for tragedy. I asked, "This project, what was the promise?" "A cure for a degenerative disease. The trials were falsified. The formula never worked." "Whose falsification?" Wolfe pressed. She hesitated. "Arthur never said. He destroyed his notes." "That, madam, is seldom true. Scientists destroy nothing. They misplace." She flinched but didn't argue. Wolfe rang for Fritz. "Beer." "2?" I asked hopefully. "1," he said without mercy. "Your reflexive thirst shall wait." When Fritz reappeared with the chilled glass, Wolfe took a contemplative sip, the sort of pause that could convict nations. "Archie, call Saul Panzer. I require discretion." I moved to the phone and dialed Saul's number. The rain's static made it sound like ghosts eavesdropping. When Saul answered, I gave him the short version. "Wolfe wants you in on something quiet. Background on a Dr. Kelling, lately deceased. Start with Harriman Laboratories. Old files, scandals, 1929. No footprints, no headlines." "Understood," Saul said and hung up, which is his idea of a long conversation. I turned back. "Your bloodhound's loose." "Good," Wolfe leaned forward. "Now, Mrs. Kent, why come to me instead of the police? Sentiment cannot be your sole motive." Her composure cracked a little. "Because the police already decided. They see suicide, they don't see the past." "Pfui, the past is visible to any mind that bothers to look. The difficulty is tolerating the stench." That one hit her. She looked down. "Arthur wasn't perfect, Mr. Wolfe. He carried guilt for what we did, but he wouldn't take his life." "Then someone expedited his remorse." She nodded faintly. I stepped in. "Who benefits from Kelling being dead? Money? Reputation?" "Harriman," she said at once. "He's built an empire on the ashes of that project. If anyone discovered the truth, it would ruin him." Wolfe's voice went soft. "And you, madam, are you not equally implicated?" "I had no part in the falsification." "Yet you shared the proceeds." "Yes," she whispered. The silence after that was thick enough to bottle. Rain against glass, the faint tick of the clock and the smell of Wolfe's beer filled the gaps. He said finally, "You will give me the names and present addresses of all surviving associates." She fished a notebook from her purse, wrote neatly, and handed it over. He read aloud. "Philip Harriman, 320 Park Avenue. George Lannard, Riverside Laboratories, Queens. Yourself." He folded the slip. "Thank you." "Will you help me?" "That depends on whether help is still possible." Her eyes flickered toward the envelope on his desk. "What did he write, Mr. Wolfe?" He paused, then recited, "What we buried in 29 refuses to stay buried. The debt comes due. Beware Harriman's promise." She went pale. Then he knew. "Apparently. The question is, who else did?" Fritz returned to clear the empty glass, his expression saying plainly that murder investigations were inferior to cuisine. When the door closed, Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, note, We require the patent records of the Harriman Pharmaceutical Trust, also the corporate dissolution files for 1929. I said, if I ask the clerk for those, he'll think I'm writing a history book. Then oblige his illusion. Right. What do I file it under, science or sin? He ignored that and shifted his bulk in the chair, a slow earthquake. Mrs. Kent, you may go. I will contact you when I have facts, not fears. She rose. Thank you. As she reached the door, Wolfe added, and Mrs. Kent, speak to no one of this visit, especially Mr. Harriman. I won't. After she left, I said, she's truthful enough to fool a saint. She reeks of expedience, he replied, but sincerity and desperation often share a perfume. Meaning? She may tell truth to survive it. The phone rang then. I got it. Saul's voice, quiet and efficient. Found it. Kelling and Lannard were chief researchers at Harriman Labs. Scandal hit in late 29. Unauthorized human trials. Company folded. No indictments. Files sealed. Rumor said payoff money changed hands. Who took the fall? Nobody. But the press called it Harriman's Promise, a drug that promised too much. Nice slogan for a curse, I said. Anything else? One lab tech died during the tests. Accident, officially. Uh-huh. Keep digging. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. Saul confirms it. The scandal was real. The name too. Smells like hush money. Wolfe nodded grimly. Moral decay in science. An old stench renewed daily. Men worship progress as deity and forget that gods demand sacrifice. Usually other people's. He gave me a look halfway between approval and reproach. Cynicism is the armor of fools. Sure, but it fits, he sighed. Archie, compose a memorandum of Saul's findings, file it under Kelling, Harriman Connection, then telephone the Gazette, speak with Lon Cohen, ask if any obituaries of Dr. Kelling mention his wartime research. Lon will want to know why. Tell him curiosity. If he presses, hang up. I went to the typewriter, the keys clacking like distant gunfire while Wolfe stared out at the rain. After a few minutes, I said, You think this letter was meant for you alone, or as bait? Perhaps both. Meaning someone knew you'd get dragged in. Possibly. Or Kelling foresaw that his death would require intellect to interpret it. Flattery from beyond the grave. Pfui. Flattery is a solvent. Truth corrodes more cleanly. I finished the memo and set it on his blotter. He read it, nodded once, then rang the bell cord. Fritz reappeared, again perfectly timed as though trained by clairvoyance. Dinner at 8 as usual, sir? Yes, and the menu shall include restraint. My digestion is not immune to moral outrage. Of course. Fritz vanished. I stretched. So what's next? We let Saul tail Harriman? No, we observe first. Haste is the ally of fools and policemen. Kramer'll love that. He will adapt. He always does. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. You will, however, telephone Mrs. Kent tomorrow to confirm she remains alive and unharassed. Unharassed by whom? That, Archie, is the question we are paid to answer. Paid? She hasn't written a check. He opened one eye. You are mercenary. Call it survival. Then survive by patience. When the guilty hurry, the wise wait, I grinned. And when the wise nap, the secretary works late. He permitted a faint smile. Your martyrdom will be remembered. After dinner. At that, the elevator motor hummed as he rose, slow and ponderous, heading for the orchid rooms. The smell of rain followed him up the shaft like a mourner. I lit a cigarette, watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling fan, and muttered to myself, if skeletons are rattling, Doc Kelling sure picked a lively closet. Outside, the storm hadn't quit. It just waited, same as us. Fritz's Trout Amandine has ruined more alibis than Kramer's cigar smoke ever did. The night of the Harriman dinner proved no exception. By 7:50, the dining room glowed like a cathedral of deceit, candles trimmed, silver polished, and Wolfe at the head of the table, expression carved from basalt. I was stationed halfway down, honorary witness and part-time waiter, wondering how much poison could hide behind etiquette. At 8 sharp, the bell rang. Fritz answered and ushered in Lydia Kent, followed closely by Philip Harriman, tall, sleek, and radiating self-regard. His tuxedo was perfect, His conscience, I suspected, less so. Lydia's black dress was simple, almost funereal. If guilt had a colour palette, the pair had it cornered. "Mr. Harriman," Wolfe said, rising slightly, his version of a bow. "Mrs. Kent, you honour my table. Sit, please." Harriman smiled the way financiers smile at auditors. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Wolfe. I'm curious what your methods will make of Arthur Kelling's tragedy." "That," Wolfe said, settling again into his chair, "depends on what truth allows." Fritz entered with the first course: trout, almonds crisp to perfection, lemon slices placed like punctuation. As I served the plates, Harriman sniffed appreciatively. "I see your chef's fame is deserved. An art I admire. Order, precision, timing. Pity Arthur never mastered those qualities." Lydia flinched. "That's unfair, Philip." He dabbed his mouth. "My dear, the man was unstable. You knew it. He brooded, fretted. If he chose to end it, it wasn't madness, it was mathematics." "Mathematics?" Wolfe inquired mildly. "An equation, Mr. Wolfe. Guilt plus failure equals self-destruction." I said, "Nothing like trout and treachery to spice up a Thursday." Harriman's smile tightened. Wolfe didn't rebuke me, which in our house counts as applause. We ate in silence for a few moments, the kind where forks speak louder than people. Candlelight shimmered on the decanter of Riesling. I noticed Harriman's cufflink as he reached for his glass. Gold, serpent-shaped, its eyes tiny emeralds. I'd seen that shape before, on the half-burned envelope fished from Kelling's fireplace. My fork paused mid-air. Wolfe's eyes, without shifting, followed mine and stayed there a second longer than coincidence. Harriman caught the pause. "Something wrong, Mr. Goodwin?" "Just admiring craftsmanship," I said. "That serpent design looks familiar." He turned his wrist casually. "Family crest. Old motif. Why?" "Oh, no reason. I collect coincidences." Lydia's napkin twisted in her lap. Wolfe gestured lightly with his hand, an unspoken "enough." When he does that, conversation freezes like a bird spotting a hawk. Dessert arrived. Chocolate soufflé, Fritz's masterpiece. You'd think sweetness would help the mood, but the room had the temperature of a courtroom. Wolfe waited until the plates were set and Fritz had withdrawn before he spoke again. "Mr. Harriman," he said, "your statement to me yesterday differed subtly from the one you gave Inspector Kramer." "Did it?" Harriman's tone was lazy. "I hardly recall the details." "Then allow me." Wolfe produced a folded paper from beside his plate, my photostat of the gas service records. "You told the inspector you dined with Dr. Kelling last Tuesday, left at 10:30, and his death occurred later that night. However, the gas supply to his building was interrupted from 10 to midnight for maintenance. If you left at 10:30, there could have been no gas flow to fill the room." Harriman's fork clinked against the plate. "That's absurd. The man was dead when—" He stopped, catching himself. "When you returned," Wolfe prompted gently. Lydia gasped. "Philip!" He recovered fast. "Slip of the tongue. I meant when the gas was flowing again." "Convenient correction," I said. Wolfe sipped his wine. "Indeed. Yet inconsistencies illuminate intention. The truth, Mr. Harriman, is rarely served warm. It must be chilled to be preserved." Harriman leaned back, eyes narrowing. "If you're implying I had anything to do with Arthur's death, you'll regret it." "I imply nothing," Wolfe said, voice as calm as thunder before the strike. "I deduce that you misremember. Whether that misremembrance is innocent depends on your appetite for deceit." Lydia pushed back her chair suddenly. "Stop it, both of you." Tears glimmered. "Arthur is dead, and you're turning dinner into a spectacle." "Madam," Wolfe said quietly, "truth is seldom graceful." She rose halfway. "I won't sit here and listen to this." Wolfe's hand moved slightly, palm up, his signal for patience. "Mrs. Kent, one moment. Mr. Harriman, may I ask, why host a reunion of those connected with Harriman's promise after 20 years? Harriman's mouth twisted. "Because time heals. I wanted to bury the past." "Yet," Wolfe said, "what we bury often refuses to stay buried." The phrase hit Lydia like a blow. She sank back into her chair, face ashen. Harriman stared at Wolfe. "You've read his letter." "I have," Wolfe replied. Harriman's knuckles whitened on the tablecloth. Then you know Kelling's mind was diseased. That letter proves it. On the contrary, it proves foresight. The silence stretched. Even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath. I decided a diversion might keep the soufflé from curdling. So, I said lightly, family crest, dead partner, missing pen, half-burned envelope. Either we're building a mystery or a scrapbook. Harriman ignored me. He looked at Wolfe. I came here as a courtesy. If this dinner is an inquisition, I'll leave. Do, Wolfe said simply. But before you go, answer one question. Why was Dr. Kelling's gas tap only half open? He froze, eyes darting from me to Lydia. How would I know that? You wouldn't, I said, unless you'd been there after he was dead. That did it. Lydia burst into tears, real ones, loud enough to make Fritz peek from the doorway. Wolfe gestured him back silently. Harriman slammed his napkin down. This is outrageous. Outrageous, Wolfe echoed, but not unproductive. Mrs. Kent, I regret subjecting you to discomfort. However, if deception continues, I must withdraw from the case. She looked up, startled. Withdraw? But you can't stop now. I can, madam, Wolfe said, rising a fraction. I do not pursue truth for sport. If honesty does not prevail among those who seek my aid, I am an accessory to falsehood. I will not play accomplice. Lydia's voice broke. I'm not lying. He inclined his head. Then ensure Mr. Harriman's veracity matches yours. Harriman stood. I'm done here. Excellent, Wolfe murmured. That simplifies matters. Fritz, appearing again like a well-trained ghost, opened the door. Harriman stalked out without another word. Lydia lingered, trembling. I stepped forward, hand light on her arm. Wolfe's glance met mine, a silent order, gentler than usual. See her out. In the hallway she paused, struggling for composure. He's hiding something, isn't he? I've stopped betting against Wolfe, I said. He usually wins. She gave a small, hopeless nod and left. Back in the dining room, Wolfe was still standing, a rarity. He looked at the empty chairs, the half-eaten trout, the flickering candles. Masks, he said softly, almost to himself. Everyone wears them. The trick is discovering who enjoys the disguise. I started stacking plates just to make noise. You want me to tail our masked friend tonight? No. Let him imagine triumph. He rang for Fritz again. Coffee. When the cup arrived, he sipped, eyes half closed. You noted the cufflinks? I'd have to be blind not to. Serpent design matches the envelope imprint. Precisely. Coincidence? Phooey, I grinned. So the serpent sheds his skin but not his guilt. An apt metaphor, he said. File a memorandum tomorrow. Title it Dinner. Phase 1, Venom Served Cold. Nice headline. Cohen'll steal it. He didn't smile. Archie, honesty is the only antidote. If Mrs. Kent deceives me again, I shall end this charade. You think she's lying? Perhaps, but her distress tonight was genuine. Then she's either innocent or a world-class actress. Indeed, he lifted the coffee cup again. You will see her tomorrow, gently. That an order or a fatherly suggestion? He sighed. You exasperate me, yet you perform adequately. Careful, I said. One more compliment and I'll start expecting a raise. Perish the thought. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 9. Wolfe extinguished the candles with deliberate puffs of breath, symbolic probably, though he'd deny it. The room smelled faintly of almonds and accusation. As he turned toward the office, he paused. Archie. Yeah? He studied me for a moment. You handled Mrs. Kent with tact, an unfamiliar but not unwelcome trait. I gave a mock bow. Flattery will get you nowhere. Nor you, if you persist in levity. Good night. He moved toward the elevator. The door slid shut behind him, leaving me with the clinking of silver and the echo of his warning. I looked at the empty chair where Harriman had sat, the napkin crumpled like a discarded alibi, and muttered, if that was dinner, I'd hate to see dessert. Then I turned out the lights. You can tell a day is going to misbehave when the phone rings before breakfast. At 8:30, I was still in my robe, heading for the kitchen and coffee that smelled like redemption when the instrument started yelping. Fritz appeared at the office door, balancing a tray of rolls and looking offended by the interruption. It's Mr. Panzer, he said. That name at that hour meant bad news with a capital homicide. I took the receiver. Yes, all? Another one, he said. His voice never hurries, which makes it worse. George Lannard, dead in his lab, throat cut. Police calling it suicide. Sure, I said. And I'm the Queen of Denmark. Where? Riverside Laboratories, Queens. Anyone with him? Kramer's men already there. That did it. Okay, I'll head over. You keep digging. When I hung up, Wolfe was already in the doorway, looking as pleased as a man told orchids had been outlawed. You answer telephones too early, Archie. Maybe, but this call says our little club of partners just lost another member. He frowned. Lannard. The same. Throat cut. Another suicide. Phooey. Coincidence is the last refuge of lazy minds. Attend the scene. Exercise your eyes before Kramer's men trample them. Always a pleasure. He started toward the elevator. You will, of course, breakfast first. Efficiency does not require starvation. That's Wolfe's version of be careful. I took the hint, downed coffee and a roll, and by 9:20 was steering the Heron across the Queensborough Bridge into a sky the colour of old typewriter ribbon. Lannard's lab squatted on a side street near the river, one of those modern cubes of glass and gilt. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, ozone, and something else. Blood trying to pretend it wasn't there. A uniform at the door checked my credentials, recognized the name Wolfe, and waved me through. Kramer was already in the lab, hat off, cigar unlit, eyes weary but working. He turned when he heard my shoes. Goodwin. Morning, Inspector. You keeping a collection? 2 suicides in 2 days. Your boy's got a pattern. Wolfe doesn't do patterns, he does proofs. And I'd bet my rent this isn't suicide. He snorted. You'd bet your rent on the sunrise. I looked around. The room was white tile from floor to ceiling, the kind of clean that feels dirty underneath. On a central table lay Lannard, what was left of him, head tilted at an angle that made conversation difficult. A straight razor glinted nearby, staged too carefully. Kramer followed my eyes. Door locked from the inside. Window latch snapped. He used his own razor. Sure he did, I said. Then he politely wiped his hands, set the scene, and fell just right for the camera. Don't get clever. Too late. I knelt near the table, avoiding the blood that had already gone brown. You get a look at his notes? Kramer nodded toward a pile of charred paper in a sink. Ledger. Somebody torched it. Suicides love to tidy up, don't they? He grunted. You planning to run a parallel investigation? I'm planning to keep my employer informed. You'll get his conclusions, same as always. Yeah, he muttered, and I'll look forward to being insulted by them. That counted as civility from Kramer, so I let it ride. The rest of the lab looked like a science exhibit after a riot. Beakers shattered, drawers pulled, cabinets ajar. I moved through carefully, using a handkerchief to shift papers. The hum of refrigeration units filled the silence, steady as guilt. On one counter, a notebook had survived the fire, a corner blackened but legible. I flipped it open. Inside, near the edge of the page, was an etching I'd seen before, a serpent curling around a staff, faint but deliberate. The same serpent as Harriman's cufflink. I felt my pulse notch up. Kramer, I said, you got a camera? He gestured to a detective with one. Get that symbol, I told him, top right corner. Kramer scowled. You taking over? Just helping you look brilliant later. I turned the page. The next sheet was smeared with violet ink, exactly the shade from Kelling's missing fountain pen. Someone had tried to blot it, leaving a perfect thumbprint shape, but too smudged to read. Still, it was a match that sang louder than a confession. Kramer came over. What's that? Proof that our late Dr. Lannard shared stationery habits with our earlier stiff. He bent closer. Violet ink, huh? Kelling's girl mentioned that pen. Yep. Somebody's carrying it around like a calling card. Kramer exhaled smoke from a cigar he hadn't lit. Hell of a business. Yep. Science turned to sin. He shot me a look. Save the sermon for Wolfe. Already reserved. He rubbed his temples. All right, Goodwin. You see anything I missed, tell me. But tell me soon. The DA's breathing down my neck. That's a dangerous spot, Inspector. He almost smiled. Get out of here. By noon I was back at the brownstone. The smell of Fritz's veal cutlets almost beat the smell of the lab out of my nose. Wolfe was at his desk, mid-beer, mid-mood. Well, he demanded. Another partner gone, razor across the throat, ledger burned, violet ink on the floor, and, for garnish, the same serpent symbol as Harriman's cufflinks. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Predictable, but not banal. Sit. I did. Kramer thinks it's suicide, 2 of them. He's muttering about coincidence again. Then he has abandoned intellect for habit. His habit's usually right. Phooey. Habit is a narcotic. Evidence is the only stimulant. I grinned. You're in fine sermon form. Want the full gospel? Speak. I laid it out. The locked door, the burned notes, the ink, the insignia. He listened without interruption, which means he was thinking so fast the words had to catch up. When I finished, he was silent for a long 30 seconds. Then, violet ink, the serpent insignia, both signatures of possession. Someone wanted these men erased, yet branded the erasures with their own emblem. Not subtle, I said. Maybe proud. He nodded. Vanity and guilt often share lineage. Maybe Harriman's cleaning house. Perhaps. Or perhaps he is being framed by someone who understands his symbols. Red herring, huh? Possibly, but even false trails leave footprints. Did you retain samples? I got photos. Kramer's man took them. I handled nothing. Commendable, he said. I blinked. Well now, the Wolfean equivalent of a hug. Do not abuse it. I'll embroider it on my heart. He gave a short, disgusted breath, his version of laughter. Archie, schedule Saul for tomorrow morning. I wish him to trace all known associates of George Lannard since the reunion dinner, and inform Mr. Kramer, courteously, that our conclusion remains unchanged. These are murders concealed by theatrics. I'll word it gentle. Don't want to ruin his lunch. Lunch, Wolfe said, glancing toward the door as Fritz appeared with the tray, is sacred. Let us not profane it with foolish men or their corpses. I stood, washing my hands in air. If this is what research funding gets you, I'll stick to crossword puzzles. Indeed, Wolfe said, reaching for his beer, and kindly leave the science to the sinners. If guilt had a perfume, Lydia Kent was wearing eau de diversion. That was my first thought when Kramer phoned at 9:15 the next morning and barked, "Get down here, Goodwin. Your clients confessed to both killings." It was the kind of news that made even the coffee taste like irony. Wolfe, midway through Eggs with Truffles, looked up at me as if I'd announced the extinction of logic. "Confessed?" he repeated, as though the word were in an unfamiliar language. "Preposterous." "She's at homicide, wrapped up in virtue and bad arithmetic," I said. "You want me to go?" He sighed, setting his fork down with ceremonial disgust. "Yes, go. Observe. She lies, of course, but lies can illuminate when cast by the right lantern." "Your lantern or mine?" "Both, but keep yours from flirting." I grinned. "It's built in, boss, can't be helped." "Phooey, then keep it leashed." By 10 o'clock, I was in the homicide bullpen, linoleum floors, coffee smell gone sour, and a typewriter chorus underscoring human misery. Kramer stood by the interrogation room window, sleeves rolled, cigar parked in the corner of his mouth. He looked like he'd aged a week overnight. "She says she did it," he said flatly. "Claims Kelling caught her cooking books, Lannard found out, so she panicked. Convenient, huh?" "Convenient enough to be untrue," I said. He grunted. "You Wolfe's mouthpiece or his echo?" "Depends who's paying the retainer." He waved me in. "Try not to spook her." Lydia sat at the steel table, the fluorescent light turning her skin the colour of old paper. Her hands were folded neatly, not trembling. The performance was too perfect. "Archie," she said softly, like she was greeting a memory instead of a man. "Morning. Confessing to murder before lunch is bad for digestion." "I've told them everything." "Then tell me something you left out," I said, taking the chair across from her. "Like why you'd use a Parker pen when Kelling owned a Waterman." Her eyes flickered. Barely, but I caught it. There it was, a flag planted in the middle of her story. "I don't recall," she said. "Sure you do. You meant to get it wrong." Kramer's reflection glared through the glass. He could hear us, but he let it roll. He knew I was digging with Wolfe's shovel. I leaned closer. "Listen, Lydia. You're clever, but this is amateur hour. 2 men are dead, and you're too calm to be guilty." "I loved Arthur," she said. "Does that help?" "It muddies the water, but thanks." She gave a faint smile. Tell Mr. Wolfe the letter worked. Before I could press, Kramer came in. That's enough, Goodwin, he turned to her. You're staying here till arraignment. She nodded like a woman being punished for someone else's sins. When she was led out, I followed Kramer to his office. You heard the bit about the pen, I said. Yeah, what of it? Arthur Kelling's pen was a Waterman, gold filigree. She said Parker duofold. She's planting a signal to Wolfe. Kramer puffed once. You two and your crossword clues. Maybe she just forgot. She didn't forget. She's throwing us a bone. He rubbed his jaw. You think she's covering for Harriman? I think she's covering for someone. The trick is she's good enough to make it look bad. Kramer exhaled. Tell Wolfe I'll give him 12 hours before the DA puts ink to indictment. After that, I can't stop the train. When I got back to the brownstone, Fritz had already cleared lunch. Wolfe was in his chair, the phone on the desk like a loaded weapon waiting to be aimed. She confessed? He asked. Word for word. Said she used a Parker. You told me Kelling's pen was a Waterman. Deliberate misdirection, he said, eyes half closed. She wishes me to read between the instruments. She's protecting someone then. Obviously. And her calm suggests she believes the protection worth her ruin. Maybe Harriman, maybe not. Indeed. He leaned forward, temple veins showing the strain. We shall see. Archie, obtain the financial records for the Harriman Foundation Trust, specifically offshore transfers in the last 3 years. On what grounds? On the grounds that curiosity is free. I'll need Saul. He knows which rocks to lift. Summon him. I did. Saul arrived at 4, quiet as ever, hat still dripping rain. Wolfe briefed him in 2 sentences, which Saul understood in half that time. Paper trail? He asked. Digitalized only in the imagination, Wolfe replied. The rest will be on microfilm or ledgers. Acquire both. Saul nodded. Tonight. When he left, I said, You think Harriman's using her name to launder cash? Not launder. Conceal. His wealth, her reputation. Symbiosis between guilt and innocence. That's poetic. It's arithmetic, he said curtly. The sum of lies always exceeds truth. At 7, Saul returned, smelling faintly of newsprint and damp wool. He laid 2 folders on the desk. Got the trust records. Cayman accounts under Lydia Kent's name. Total transfers, 3 million. Wolfe's brows climbed. Excellent. Funds came from subsidiaries of Harriman Laboratories. Same signature on authorization. P. Harriman. I whistled. Well, that's tidy. He buries the scandal money under her name, then kills the witnesses and lets her confess. Gentlemanly. Not quite, Wolfe said. If she confesses, the accounts freeze under investigation. His theft becomes unrecoverable. She protects him by destroying his access, not herself. A final rebellion disguised as surrender. That's romantic logic. It's human, I grinned. I'll take your word for it. Mine's still on file under cynical. He regarded me. Archie, you will deliver this data to Kramer discreetly. He will rage, threaten, and then act. Meanwhile, I shall prepare for confrontation. Meaning dinner's postponed? Dinner is sacrosanct. I merely digest evidence better than veal. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared with perfect timing. Serve, Wolfe ordered, and ensure the burgundy breathes. As Fritz retreated, Wolfe's tone softened by a hair. Archie, you are to tread carefully with Mrs. Kent. She manipulates, but not maliciously. Do not let chivalry distort judgment. I leaned against the desk. You're just jealous it's working. He glared. Imbecile. Your affectionate term for loyalty, I said. He grunted. Perhaps. The elevator hummed as he rose for dinner, leaving me with the ledgers, the rain tapping at the windows, and one comforting thought. If guilt was perfume, Manhattan was starting to reek of Harriman. If the past had brakes, Manhattan would have run out of them years ago. By the time Saul and I tracked down the archive that morning, the city was dripping with rain and guilt. We holed up in the Gazette's morgue, rows of dusty cabinets, the kind that coughed up scandals in exchange for patience. Saul was his usual unflappable self, rolling microfilm like a priest turning Bible pages. You know, he said, this stuff's older than Kramer's cynicism. Careful, I told him, that's sacred ground. At 11:20, he stopped rolling. There. He pointed at a headline from 1929. Farmer trial scandal. Harriman, Kelling, Kent, Lannard implicated. A fifth name sat lower on the page, Dr. Edward Vale, identified as consulting chemist. The text ended with his quiet disappearance after an internal inquiry. Saul leaned back. 4 dead or framed, 1 missing, neat set. Not missing anymore, I said, scanning the fine print. Says here Vale's last known address was on East 91st, University Housing. If he's still breathing, maybe he's grading exams instead of corpses. Saul smirked. Want me to sniff it out? Yeah, and keep it subtle. The guy's been underground for 20 years. No need to scare him into another one. He tipped his hat and vanished into the rain, as noiseless as guilt itself. By 2 that afternoon, we were climbing narrow stairs in a brick building near Columbia. A brass plate read E.V. Rains, Department of Chemistry. Saul raised a brow. Alias good enough for tenure. Inside, the office smelled of chalk, ink, and tired reputations. A middle-aged man sat behind a cluttered desk, spectacles perched low, hands ink-stained. When he looked up, recognition flickered. Fast, then buried. "You're from the Gazette?" he asked. "Not exactly," I said. "Archie Goodwin, assistant to Nero Wolfe. This is Saul Pantzer. We're revisiting 1929. His shoulders sagged. Then it's finally caught up. "Seems so," I said. "We've got 2 suicides that don't add up, and your old friends' names all over them. Care to comment?" He removed his glasses, wiped them on his sleeve. "Comment? Only that ghosts have better timing than reporters." Saul stepped closer. "Dr. Vale, or Professor Rains, whatever the stationery says, you disappeared after the Harriman trials. Why?" He hesitated, then motioned to the chairs. "Sit. You'll forgive me if I don't pretend innocence. I was a junior chemist at Harriman's lab, back when research meant bending ethics for patriotism. We were developing a compound, Project Serpens. The military wanted results. We gave them something else entirely." "Poison?" I asked. "Not by intention. The trials failed. Patients died. Harriman ordered the reports destroyed, said he'd protect us. Kelling protested, then recanted. Kent handled the paperwork. I vanished." "Nice trick." "I had help. New name, new field, new conscience, until last month." He opened a drawer and handed me an envelope. Old, yellowed, sealed with wax. "Arthur Kelling wrote. He said someone was reopening the file. He feared exposure. He mentioned Harriman's serpent insignia, our old emblem from Serpens Laboratories." The wax bore the same snake I'd seen on Harriman's cufflink. My pulse did a small tap dance. "Did Kelling say who was after him?" I asked. "No, only that he'd uncovered new evidence. He wanted to meet, but I declined. Cowardice masquerading as prudence." Vale gave a sad smile. "And now he's dead." Saul's eyes moved to a stack of ledgers on the shelf. "You keep everything?" "Habit of chemists. Dates, shipments, signatures." He pulled one book free and flipped to a page marked by a ribbon. 2 days before Kelling's death, Harriman signed for a chemical order. Chloroform compounds. Rare, expensive, unnecessary for modern work. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't research. I took a photostat with my portable camera. "This stays between us until Wolfe decides otherwise." Vale looked at me sharply. "Mr. Goodwin, I buried my past once. If you unearth it, make sure it's for the right grave." "Wolfe's picky about his cemeteries," I said. "He digs only where the truth's decomposing." Saul shut the ledger. "You mind if we borrow the receipt?" "Keep it," Vale said quietly. "I've had 20 years of silence. It hasn't improved with age." When we left, rain was hammering the window panes hard enough to sound like typewriter keys spelling confession. Saul and I walked back through puddles that could have reflected any decade. "So," Saul said, "we've got a vanished chemist, a snake logo, a missing conscience, and one very rich man with bad timing. Add Wolfe's appetite and we've got a full menu," I said. "Let's feed him." Back at the brownstone by 6, the orchids were getting their evening compliments upstairs, so I waited until Wolfe came down. He was frowning, which for him was practically aerobic exercise. "Well," he demanded. "We found your ghost, Dr. Edward Vale, now Professor Rains. He's been hiding in academia under a new monogram, and he talks." "Useful?" "Very. Kelling contacted him before his death. Vale says Harriman's serpent insignia comes from something called Serpens Laboratories, front for wartime chemical experiments." Wolfe's lips compressed. "So, the serpent was literal." Serpens. Fitting. There's more? We got a receipt for chemical shipments, signed by Harriman 2 days before Kelling bought himself a gas chamber. Show me. I handed him the photostat. He studied it like scripture, eyes narrowing at the signature. Beautiful, he murmured. He betrays himself by pride of penmanship. Saul, still standing, said, He'll deny it. He will, Wolfe agreed, but he will not succeed. Mr. Harriman is an artist of concealment who forgets that every artist leaves fingerprints. I leaned against the desk. You think the chemicals were for murder? Not directly. They were for staging. Gas, chloroform, suicides by formula. Neat, convenient, plausible. Too plausible, I said. Indeed. He pressed the bell cord, summoning Fritz for beer. Mr. Pantzer, excellent work. You will be compensated. Saul gave a brief nod. That's why I work for you, not applause. Wolfe raised his glass when Fritz brought it. To efficiency. When Saul left, Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you persist despite provocation. Commendable. Don't gush. You'll ruin your reputation. He took a slow sip. You may yet earn your keep. Now that's affection in the Wolfian dialect, he grunted. Enough levity. Prepare a memorandum for Kramer. He will need bait for Harriman. I sat at the typewriter. And what's our bait? The truth, Wolfe said. Men like Harriman cannot resist correcting their own lies. I hit the keys. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady whisper, like the city breathing through its sins. If headlines could shoot, we'd need flak jackets instead of neckties. By the time the evening edition of the Gazette hit the streets, Manhattan was buzzing like a hornet's nest with a typewriter for a queen. Lon Cohen had done his job beautifully. The front page screamed, Lydia Kent to name killer in scientific slayings, exclusive. It wasn't just bait. It was Wolfe's equivalent of tossing a raw steak into a shark tank and waiting for the bubbles. In the brownstone, the atmosphere was as calm as the eye of a hurricane. Wolfe sat at his desk, fingers steepled, eyes half closed, breathing the quiet satisfaction of a chess master who had just moved his queen into position. Fritz had brought in beer, 2 chilled glasses, and retreated like a priest leaving an altar. The amber lamplight caught the faint smoke from Wolfe's cigar and turned it into fog that looked philosophical. I was at my desk, rereading the Gazette piece for the 5th time. Cohen sure knows how to write for panic, I said. The way he's worded this, half the city thinks Lydia's hiding in your basement ready to sing. She is hiding, Wolfe said calmly, and she will sing, eventually, but not as they expect. He shifted his bulk, the chair giving its usual groan of servitude. Mr. Harriman is not a man to let rumour ripen. He will strike, and soon. Provided Kramer doesn't strike first. He won't. He is a man of duty, but not of haste, which is why we shall invite him courteously to the brownstone before his own men alert him to our impertinence. I gave him a long look. You're leaking stories, baiting billionaires, and now you want the NYPD in on the con. Ambitious night. He lifted one eyebrow. It is not a con, Archie. It is orchestration, a symphony of egos and fears, and we are its conductors. I muttered, just hope the brass section doesn't shoot first. He ignored me, which meant he was pleased. At 7:30, he nodded toward the phone. Call Mr. Cohen. Inform him I am gratified. Then call Inspector Kramer. He may swear, but he will come. Kramer arrived an hour later, his trench coat dripping on Fritz's immaculate mat. He looked like a man forced to read poetry at gunpoint. Fritz took the coat silently. Kramer grunted and followed me into the office. Cigar already lit, smoke trailing like a bad omen. Wolfe, he growled, you're out of your mind. That headline's a stick of dynamite and you're sitting on it. Perhaps, Wolfe said, unbothered, but dynamite properly placed excavates truth. I'm not in the mood for word games. That story makes it sound like your client fingered Harriman. She hasn't. Yet. Kramer's jaw worked. You just painted a target on her head. I have done worse, Inspector, Wolfe said mildly, and with greater success. I poured him a coffee, black, strong, and unasked for. Relax, Kramer. You'll get a warrant out of it if it works. Yeah, or a funeral. He dropped into the red leather chair, glaring. All right. What's your play? Wolfe leaned back. Our murderer is cornered. Mr. Harriman's panic will betray him. I expect him, or his envoy within 24 hours. On what grounds? His vanity. Men like Harriman believe in controlling narratives. Tonight's Gazette strips him of control. He must restore it, by silencing Lydia Kent or by silencing me. Kramer tapped ash into the tray. You want me to post men here, play bodyguard for you and your choir girl? I want you to watch, Wolfe said. Nothing more. Station 2 men discreetly outside the brownstone. When Harriman moves, they will see. That's thin ice, Wolfe. It will hold, Wolfe said. The water beneath is shallow, only reputation deep. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You're betting a woman's life on psychology. Not betting, Inspector, calculating. He sat back, chewing his cigar. All right, he said finally. You get your watchers, but if this blows up, I'll have to explain to the Commissioner why I let a private fat man run public strategy. Wolfe inclined his head. You may tell him it was an experiment in civic cooperation. Kramer snorted. Yeah, cooperation. You know, Wolfe, sometimes I think you'd rather lose a case than share credit. That, Inspector, is slander, Wolfe said gravely. I have never desired credit. I desire only accuracy. I couldn't help it. He's modest to a fault, Kramer. Unfortunately, the fault's mine. Kramer gave me the look he reserves for cockroaches and journalists, then rose. All right, I'll play, but you'd better hope your orchestra doesn't miss a note. When he left, Wolfe let out a small sigh, almost affectionate. A good man. Annoying, but good. Yeah, I said, like a toothache that pays taxes. At 9, Lon Cohen called. Archie, I hope Wolfe's satisfied. The edition's selling like confession pamphlets in purgatory. He's pleased, I said. How's the reaction? Phones haven't stopped. Harriman's lawyer called our editor before we even hit the street. Claims defamation, demands retraction. That got Wolfe's attention. I covered the receiver. His lawyers already called the Gazette. Before publication, Wolfe asked sharply. Yep, says the piece endangers a respected businessman. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Proof. Of what? Inside knowledge. He knew before the presses rolled. Someone at the Gazette, or near it, alerted him in advance. Cohen's clean, I said. He wouldn't leak a word. Perhaps not he. Perhaps someone listening. Mr. Harriman has ears everywhere. Wolfe nodded once. Thank Mr. Cohen and tell him to print a follow-up tomorrow noon. Harriman's silence stokes suspicion. He will protest again, and that will confirm the line of bait. When I hung up, I said, You're turning the press into an accomplice. An instrument, Wolfe corrected. Newspapers are mirrors. One must merely decide which reflection to cast. Let's hope the mirror doesn't shatter. He waved a hand. Enough. We proceed. At 10:15, Wolfe dictated a letter, his favourite form of chess move. To Philip Harriman, President, Harriman Laboratories. Dear Sir, a matter has arisen requiring immediate clarification. I am in possession of testimonial documents recently recovered from Dr. Edward Vale, formerly of your employ, which bear upon the deaths of Dr. Arthur Kelling and Mr. George Lannard. I urge you to attend my office at your earliest convenience to forestall undesirable publicity. Respectfully, Nero Wolfe. He handed it to me. You will ensure this is delivered by hand tomorrow morning. I glanced up. And if he decides to stay home polishing his conscience? He won't. Vanity again. He will come, or send someone reckless enough to fall into the snare. And I'm supposed to hold the net? You will bait it, Wolfe said. When he arrives, he must believe I possess Vale's signed statement. You will present the forgery. That's illegal. It is theatrical, Wolfe replied. And temporary. No harm shall result, except perhaps to Mr. Harriman's equilibrium. Good to know mine's optional. He allowed himself the faintest smile. You, Archie, are indispensable. I entrust this element to you alone. Meaning Saul's on leave? Meaning, he said dryly, I require someone whose improvisations are at least as reckless as his loyalty. That's touching, boss. You almost sound paternal. Phooey, I sound practical. Still, it wasn't nothing. Wolfe didn't delegate unless he trusted both competence and survival instincts, and mine had earned tenure. By 11, the office was half dark except for the lamplight turning Wolfe's forehead into marble. Outside, traffic muttered through wet streets. He leaned back, eyes closed, and spoke as if to himself. Reputation is the last refuge of scoundrels. Mr. Harriman guards his like a miser guards coin. When it trembles, he will appear. I said, and when he does? Then, Wolfe said, we close the circle. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the kitchen, Fritz was washing the last of the dinner china, careful as though each plate were a secret. I sat at my typewriter and began drafting the phony veil statement Wolfe had outlined earlier, precise enough to tempt, vague enough to survive scrutiny. The sound of keys filled the office like a countdown. Halfway through, Wolfe broke the silence. Archie? Yeah? Should danger arise, and it will, do not act rashly. I grinned over my shoulder. Rashly? Me? Never. I plan my recklessness days in advance. He opened one eye. Your levity conceals competence, which is why I tolerate it. That's love in this house, I said. We just dress it in insults. He made a noise somewhere between a grunt and a chuckle. Then he reached for his beer, lifted it halfway and held it there, staring into the amber light as if it were a crystal ball. Tomorrow, Archie. Tomorrow we shall see who fears reflection most. The glass touched his lips. Outside, a newspaper truck rattled by, hawking the bait that would bring a killer to our door. When a man like Philip Harriman knocks at your door, it isn't courtesy, it's siege warfare in a necktie. The bell rang at precisely 3 minutes past 10, the sound crisp enough to cut through the morning quiet of West 35th Street. Fritz appeared at the office doorway, brows slightly raised. "A Mr. Harriman to see you, sir. He says it concerns urgent business." Wolfe looked up from the book he wasn't really reading, an unnecessary ritual to show annoyance. "Urgent business," he repeated. "Pfui, admit him." I took my seat at the desk, ready to play usher and spectator in equal parts. Harriman entered like a man trying to pretend he wasn't entering enemy territory. His overcoat was damp from the drizzle outside, his gloves clutched tight, his face the picture of cultivated restraint, except for the eyes. The eyes were tired, hunted, and too sharp for comfort. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice rich and smooth, "thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "You are welcome," Wolfe replied, not moving, "though gratitude may prove premature." Harriman smiled faintly. "You are, I presume, aware of the unpleasant rumours circulating in the press." "I rarely attend to gossip," Wolfe said, "but Mr. Cohen's articles are another matter. He is a journalist of discernment." Harriman's jaw twitched. "Then you understand my position. I came not to quarrel, but to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Wolfe asked. "The value of your innocence." I enjoyed the silence that followed. Harriman glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. "I am not on trial." "Not formally," Wolfe said, "though you behave as if the verdict were already against you. Sit, please. Your posture offends symmetry." He sat, smoothing his lapels. "You have a flair for the theatrical, Mr. Wolfe. Let's not waste time. You claim to possess evidence that implicates me in criminal matters. I'm here to resolve that misunderstanding." "Resolution," Wolfe murmured, "is an agreeable word, but misunderstandings must first be understood." He gestured toward me. "Archie?" I opened the folder on the desk and began laying out the exhibits like cards in a magician's trick. "We've got a few props for your enlightenment, Mr. Harriman. Exhibit A, bank records showing transfers from your foundation to offshore accounts under Lydia Kent's name. Exhibit B, a receipt for chemical shipments signed by you 2 days before Dr. Kelling's death. And Exhibit C," I paused dramatically, "your favourite accessory." Harriman frowned. "Accessory?" "Your serpent cufflinks," I said, matching the insignia on the half-burned envelope at Kelling's apartment and on Lannard's lab notebook. He stiffened, then smiled thinly. "You're mistaken. I had many such sets made years ago. Corporate branding." "Sure," I said. "Every killer needs a logo." Wolfe's tone sliced through the room. "Archie." "Sorry, sir. Habit." Harriman's smile vanished. "Mr. Wolfe, I didn't come here to be insulted." "Then you should not have come," Wolfe said. "You came because your vanity forbade inaction. The Gazette story wounded your pride, not your conscience. But vanity, Mr. Harriman, is an accommodating host. It often invites guilt to supper." The man's composure was beginning to crack, though he tried to keep the mask. "You're accusing me without proof." "On the contrary," Wolfe said softly, You have brought the proof yourself. Harriman blinked. What? Your briefcase, if you please. He hesitated. I don't see Archie. I reached across and lifted the case from beside his chair. He started to protest, then froze as I unlatched it. Inside were neatly arranged folders, a silver pen, and a faint smell of ink and panic. Careful, I said, holding it up. If guilt stains, violet's your colour, pal. The nib was slick with the same violet ink I'd seen on Kelling's desk weeks earlier. More telling still, faint smudges darkened Harriman's fingertips. Wolfe leaned forward a fraction, his equivalent of lunging across a battlefield. Dr. Kelling's pen, he said, missing from the scene of his death, reappearing in your possession. That's absurd, Harriman snapped. It's mine. Indeed, Wolfe said. So you claim. And yet this particular model was custom-made for Dr. Kelling, with a distinctive marbled body and gold clip engraved with his initials. Your oversight is understandable. Murder, like chemistry, demands precision, but rarely achieves it. Harriman's breath came short. You're trying to frame me. I am trying, Wolfe said, to contain you. For a moment, silence. Then his temper broke. You think you can sit there and pass judgment? You, a sedentary charlatan living off scandal and rumour. Mr. Harriman, Wolfe said, voice low and heavy, I do not pass judgment. I merely expose it. The rest is self-inflicted. I was about to add a quip when the front door opened without ceremony. Kramer, storming in with 2 detectives on his heels. He filled the office like a fire alarm in a library. Wolfe, he barked, you pull another publicity stunt and... He stopped cold, eyes locking on Harriman. Well, look what the storm blew in. Harriman rose halfway. Inspector, I was... Sit down, Kramer said. He took a step closer, cigar clamped tight. You weren't invited, but I'm glad you came. Saves me a warrant. Wolfe lifted a hand. Inspector, your arrival is opportune, though premature. I was about to elicit a confession. Then don't let me spoil the show. Kramer leaned on the desk, arms folded. Harriman's eyes darted from one of us to the other, trapped in the kind of silence that makes the air too thick to breathe. This is madness, he said finally. You can't prove anything. Allow me, Wolfe said. Dr. Kelling discovered that you, Mr. Harriman, had revived the Serpens compound, an illegal chemical formula long banned for its lethal properties. You sought to profit by selling it through intermediaries abroad. When Kelling threatened exposure, you silenced him, staging his death as suicide. Lannard stumbled onto the same secret, hence his throat cut. A grim efficiency, but characteristic of your kind. Lies, Harriman thundered. Then explain the pen, Wolfe said. Explain the ink on your hands. Explain the serpent on your cufflinks and the fortune in the Caymans under another's name. Harriman's voice caught. Sweat shone at his temple. You don't understand. I didn't mean for them to die. Kelling confronted me. He was hysterical. He threatened to ruin everything, to drag us all down. I only meant to frighten him. Kramer straightened, eyes narrowing. You just did my job, Harriman. Harriman slumped back in the chair, words spilling faster now. Lannard found out. He wanted his share to keep quiet. There was no choice. You think I wanted this? The war ruined us once already. I just wanted to reclaim something. By selling poison, I said. A noble calling. Kramer shot me a warning look. Wolfe intervened smoothly. Mr. Goodwin's indiscretions serve the pursuit of justice, Inspector. Kramer grunted. That's a new one. Wolfe ignored him, his gaze fixed on Harriman, whose confession had deflated into exhaustion. There will be no more talk of reclaiming, sir. You have merely repeated the pattern of corruption that began in 1929. History does not forgive repetition. Kramer gestured to his men. Take him. As they moved in, Harriman whispered, You'll regret this, Wolfe. The truth doesn't make you pure. It just makes you visible. Visibility, Wolfe said, is the first step toward extinction. They led him out. The door closed, leaving the air humming with the echo of words too heavy to vanish quickly. Kramer stood by the desk, lighting a fresh cigar. I'll be damned, he said. Every time I think you've peaked, you pull another miracle out of that chair. Wolfe leaned back. Not a miracle, merely persistence. Kramer nodded grudgingly. I'll give you that. I'll need your full statement for the DA. You shall have it, Wolfe said. In writing. Tomorrow. Good. Kramer took a puff, then added, almost softly, "Nice work, Goodwin." I blinked. "Say that again. I want to record it." "Don't push your luck." He turned to leave, muttering something about paperwork and ulcers. When he was gone, I shut the door and looked back at Wolfe. He was staring at the empty chair where Harriman had sat, expression unreadable. "So, that's it," I said. "Kelling, Lannard, all wrapped up in a serpent's skin." He nodded slowly. "Serpens," he murmured. "Truth like venom destroys as readily as it cures." "Poetic," I said. "Remind me to embroider that on a pillow." He closed his eyes, leaning back. "Archie." "Yeah?" "You were reckless today." "Always." "And useful." I grinned. "Careful, you'll start a trend." He opened one eye. "Pfui, bring the beer." Fritz entered a moment later with 2 glasses. Wolfe accepted his with ritual reverence, then raised it slightly toward me. "To exposure," he said. "To headlines," I answered. He drank deeply, setting the glass down with a sigh of finality. "I will spend tomorrow with the orchids. After so much deceit, they are refreshingly honest." "Sure," I said. "They only murder through neglect." He gave me a sideways glance that might have been amusement. "Archie, your wit is incorrigible." "And your timing's perfect," I said, because I was just about to type the final report. "Do so," he murmured. "And include one observation. Guilt, however disguised, inevitably leaks." I gestured to the violet-stained blotter on the desk, already covered. The clock chimed 11. Rain pattered faintly against the windows. Outside, Manhattan's hum resumed, oblivious to the fact that its latest devil had confessed and its resident genius was reaching for his second beer. I rolled a sheet into the typewriter, cracked my knuckles, and said, "If guilt stains violets your color," just to hear it again. Then I started typing. Some weeks end like a gunshot, others fade out like a sigh. This one drifted away under rain tapping on the brownstone windows, a rhythm so gentle even Manhattan seemed too tired to quarrel. After the parade of corpses, confessions, and Kramer's cigars, West 35th Street had reclaimed its peace, though peace in Nero Wolfe's house was a word that meant quiet digestion, not relaxation. The newspapers had done their part. The Gazette printed a careful paragraph crediting consultative cooperation between Inspector Kramer and private detective Nero Wolfe. Kramer hated the phrase consultative cooperation as much as Wolfe hated sharing credit, so naturally both men pretended not to see it. When Lon Cohen called me that morning, chuckling about the editor's diplomacy, I told him the truth. The peace treaty wouldn't last longer than Fritz's next dessert. At 1 o'clock sharp, Fritz emerged from the kitchen bearing the roast duck, a glossy brown masterpiece that looked capable of erasing sin if paired with the right burgundy. He set it down as though it were a peace offering to Olympus itself. "Excellent," Wolfe said, inhaling the aroma. "Civilization persists." I was pouring coffee when he added, "Mr. Goodwin, sit. We shall dine without the intrusion of business." That meant he'd been thinking about business all morning. We ate mostly in silence. Fritz's kind of silence, not awkward but reverent. The rain outside performed soft percussion against the window panes while the duck surrendered to its destiny. Wolfe drank slowly, contemplatively. I kept my remarks to a minimum until the third helping loosened him up. "Lydia Kent's free," I said. "Kramer's men dropped the charges yesterday. She's probably halfway to sanity by now." "She will never reach it," Wolfe murmured. "Guilt, though undeserved, leaves residue, like ink." "Speaking of ink," I said, the violet stains came out of my cuffs finally. I was starting to look like I'd strangled a fountain pen. A grunt passed for amusement. "Your vanity is insufferable but persistent." "It's my only persistent quality." Fritz, appearing at the door to clear plates, gave me a reproachful glance that implied conversation was sacrilege during duck. Wolfe raised an eyebrow, and that was that. Plates vanished, and dessert appeared. Poached pears in wine, glistening like jewels. The office would have been his usual retreat after lunch, but that day Wolfe stayed at the table, the lamplight softening his face into something almost human. Outside, the rain thickened, drumming against the ivy and muting the city beyond. "Kramer's report arrived this morning," I said, sliding the envelope across. "You're officially heroic. They're calling it decisive analytical assistance. That's bureaucratese for you made us look slow." Wolfe's lips twitched. "If they must borrow intellect, I permit it. so long as they do not misplace it. He even thanked you personally, I said. In writing, I may frame it. He scowled. You will do no such thing. The inspector's courtesy is perfunctory. He suffers graciousness as a man suffers dyspepsia. Maybe, I said, but I saw his face when Harriman signed that confession. He wasn't gloating, just tired. That, Wolfe said, is the fatigue of honesty, rare but admirable. We lingered in silence for a while. Fritz cleared the last dish and disappeared without a word. The house settled around us. The grandfather clock ticked softly, the rain whispered against the ivy, and the faint clink of silverware lingered like punctuation. Wolfe pushed his plate aside and reached for his beer. The conclusion, Archie, though satisfactory, remains unsavoury. You mean the part where two men are dead and one's in prison? Precisely. Justice is seldom symmetrical. He took a sip, eyes hooded. Dr. Kelling's folly was curiosity without conscience. Harriman's was ambition without restraint. I do not find satisfaction in such arithmetic. I leaned back. That's the closest you'll ever come to melancholy, and it looks good on you. Pfui. He waved it off, though his voice softened. We pursue order, not emotion. Yet. He paused, frowning slightly. The man was admirable in intellect. A pity he misused it. That's scientists for you, I said. Always mixing the wrong chemicals until the explosion hits someone else. Do not generalize, Wolfe said. Ignorance is also chemical. It reacts violently with truth. There was the philosopher again. Whenever Wolfe drifted into reflection, it meant the case had cut deeper than he liked to admit. I stood, wandered to the window, and watched the rain trace silver lines down the glass. You know, you could take a vacation from guilt. You cracked the case, saved Lydia, nailed Harriman. Not a bad week's work for a man allergic to effort. Vacation, he repeated, tasting the word as if it were foreign, and abandon my orchids. They'd survive. Fritz would read them bedtime stories. He gave a rare smile. Mr. Goodwin, you are insufferable. That's 2 for today, I said. If I get to 3, I win a raise. He made a noise that might have been a laugh, but disguised it as a sigh. Sit. I must dictate a letter to the district attorney. Already? The matter must be closed formally. I returned to my seat, notebook ready. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and began in that rich, deliberate tone that always made dictation feel like a sermon. To the district attorney, in the matter of the late Dr. Arthur Kelling and Mr. George Lannard, and the conviction of Mr. Philip Harriman, I submit this conclusion, that guilt, like truth, is rarely singular. Men act from converging motives, fear, vanity, profit, and the line between accomplice and bystander is often linguistic rather than moral. You have your confession, yet it is my belief that Dr. Kelling's death, though criminal, contained a strange symmetry. He perished by the formula he sought to expose, a lesson that science, untethered from conscience, devours its own. A man's atonement is measured not by repentance, but by the truth he leaves behind. He paused, eyes still closed. That will suffice. Sign it. I wrote the final line, then said, For a man who hates sentiment, Wolfe sure knows how to dress it in grammar. His lips curved. Grammar, Mr. Goodwin, is the last refuge of civilization. Remind me to embroider that for the office wall. I forbid embroidery in my presence. Figures. The rain deepened, blurring the city into grey watercolour. Wolfe sat quietly, fingers drumming once on the armrest, then still. Something about his stillness filled the room more than sound could. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was weariness, the kind that comes when even victory feels like repetition. You ever think, I said, maybe the reason you like orchids so much is they don't lie, cheat, or write headlines? He opened one eye. They also do not talk. That is their chief virtue. Touché. Nevertheless, he added, companionship, though vexing, is not valueless. Coming from you, that's practically a love letter. He ignored me, but there was warmth behind the silence. Finally, he reached for his beer again, lifted it slightly and said, To companions, living and dead. I raised my coffee. I'll drink to that. The glasses touched with a quiet chime that outlasted the thunder outside. We sat there a while, the kind of pause that doesn't need words. Fritz reappeared only once to draw the curtains tighter and refill Wolfe's glass. The brownstone, usually a stage for drama, had turned into something softer, a sanctuary against the city's noise. I looked across at Wolfe, his face half in shadow, half in lamplight. For once he didn't look monumental. He just looked tired, human, and oddly at peace. "You know," I said, "Kramer asked me yesterday if you ever smile. I told him you do, quietly, like a man cashing a moral dividend." He grunted. "You should stop talking to policemen. It contaminates your prose." "Maybe," I said, "but it keeps the rent paid." The clock struck 3. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing again, the sound of the rain sinking with his breathing. I thought of the people left behind, Lydia, free but fragile, Vale retreating again into academia, Kramer trudging through paperwork and cigar smoke. The city moved on, but Wolfe's brownstone stayed the same, anchored, unchanging, an island where truth still had a fighting chance. I reached for my notebook, flipped it shut and said softly, "Case closed." He didn't answer, but the faintest hum escaped him, approval in a key only I could recognize. I rose, turned out one lamp and headed for the hall. Behind me, Wolfe's voice floated through the dim air. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Lock the door. Peace once earned must be guarded." "Sure thing, boss." And as the rain thickened outside, I closed the office door on a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt earned.